Hi and welcome everyone. I'd like to welcome our audience to the newest episode of the editorial podcast. Today I am joined by Tom Schreurs. Tom, you're the regional sales lead at Better Collective, but I also know because we met together at the Gaming in Holland conference that you have a vast experience also from football teams and various different activities. So if I may kindly ask you for a short intro and overview, I know that you have been having many different roles, so the mic goes to you.
Okay, well, thank you for having me on the show, Stanislav. My name is Tom Schreurs, as you said, born and raised in the Netherlands, and I work as regional sales lead at Better Collective. But as you mentioned, I come from a sports marketing and partnerships background. I started my career in 2008, I believe, at FC Twente, which is a football club, and where we became Dutch champion one time. We played Champions League, but in the end we also got relegated. So over there I experienced everything you can imagine at a football club. And after that I moved to Eredivisie Media Marketing as part of ESPN and the Walt Disney Company, where I managed the league sponsorships, media rights and commercial partnerships. And it was right before the betting market in the Netherlands opened up back in 2021. And one of my main goals over there was signing a betting partner for both Eredivisie and ESPN. And that's how I got introduced to the iGaming industry. And we signed one of the largest sponsorships in the Netherlands with Holland Casino, who were back then the only licensed land-based casino, and who wanted to enter the online market. So as I came from sports and media background, I got intrigued by the performance-driven nature of this industry, as that was always in my own work. And it was also at the same time different from my experience, especially within sponsorships, where return on investment is mostly measured in vague KPIs like media value and reach. And most of the time without a direct connection to specific sales, or in this case, NDCs. So that's, a little bit of my background. And I was interested in how betting operators, they spend millions on sponsorships, and at the same time also have a big focus on affiliate marketing, and combining those two worlds, that brought me to Better Collective. And over there I'm responsible for media sales in the Netherlands and the DACH region.
Yeah, and I totally understand when you mentioned the bridge that you made from a football club that had its successes and lesser successes as well over to the sports betting market, since basically the biggest market is always in the football matches and in the betting of any of the either a local league or the championships. And that seems to be a natural way. And if you take a look at all the clubs they're sponsored, at least, for example, in Poland in the first division, I think that out of the 15 or 16 teams, maybe 5 are not having on the jersey, on the chest of the jersey, they are not having a betting company, and the remaining 10 or 11 do have an active sponsorship agreement. And as you have seen across your roles on the two sides, you're reaching millions of sports fans during every week, or even more often if you go into championship and into the league, it's at least twice per week. So all the time you have the vast audience that you reach, and how to actually turn that audience into the business opportunities for the iGaming companies.
Yeah, that's interesting. And indeed, we at Better Collective, we reach millions of sports fans through in many different markets and across many different types of publishers. But what's good to know is that we at Better Collective, we come from an affiliate background, which started in Germany about 20 years ago. And over the time, it grew into more like a sports media company, where affiliation is still an important backbone. And I think what sets us apart from pure media companies, sports media companies, and pure affiliation companies is that we combine the knowledge of performance marketing with creating high-end sports content, which in our case is mostly linked to sports betting. So for example, in Germany, where we originally come from, we still produce hundreds of optimized articles each week, and we distribute them through our owned sites and some of the operated sites. The owned sites are for example, Wettbasis, Wettfreunde, Sportwettentest. And next to that, we operate also Sport 1, which is one of the biggest sports publishers in Germany. And we operate the betting section over there. And of course, Sport 1, they can write their own articles. But what they don't have is the experience we have when it comes to optimizing those articles for Google search and leading the readers of those articles towards sports betting operators with specific call to actions. So basically what happens within this ecosystem is that in Germany, when you search on sports betting tips, there's a very big chance you land at one of our websites. And from there, we direct you to the operator that fits your betting needs. And what is important here is that these publishers, they are all seen as trustworthy and reliable sources of information for betting tips. And second, what we've seen with the growth of the company over the last couple of years is that we reach a very large specific niche audience that is already into sports betting. And we now also start to utilize other channels like YouTube, Instagram, Facebook, and other social media to create very specific sports betting content for those channels. So fans interested in sports betting, they can consume sports betting content in the way they like, whether it's video, images, or articles. And this works very well because we create multiple touch points in the changing ways of how people consume content. So personally, I strongly believe that creating more touch points across more channels for fans to interact with this type of content, it stimulates people playing, people placing bets in a legalized and controlled way. Because at Better Collective, we're a listed company, so we can only work with licensed operators. And by doing so, we create more like a 360 approach to a very specific niche audience, looking for betting tips. And that's something you can find at sports media or other affiliates. And this increases results across the board, like more NDCs, more recurring customers, higher engagement, the content, and more relevant media exposure for those operators. So that's basically how we commercialize that audience.
What would you say that when it comes to the drivers for the success and of the partnership with an operator, what matters most if you want a relationship to be truly successful with the operator?
Well, in the end results, that's the most important thing that matters, because everybody, wants results, and with operators that means NDCs and recurring customers, and all the other KPIs are supportive to those two things. But it's also important to look at the story behind all those supportive metrics, because it's not always directly visible when you just only look at the numbers. You need to get to the story behind the numbers. For example, if you have a good welcome offer in a great display ad that may have a very high click-through rate, but when you go to the landing page and that landing page is bad, it ultimately doesn't convert to an NDC. So that's why I always say NDCs and recurring customers, those are the endpoints, but you need to look at the whole funnel to have a good understanding of why something works and why something doesn't work. Because on the other hand, you can get as many impressions as you want, but if you want to promote a non-competitive offer, it will not convert, because people simply are not that stupid. And that's why you need to have that good overview of every step of the funnel. Because, we can sell impressions, but if those impressions don't get any results, you will stop buying those impressions from us. And that's why we all sit really next to an operator and look at, okay, what is the goal you're trying to achieve and how can we achieve that and what is needed to get there? Because from our point of view, we're the most relevant place to advertise for operators. But if it doesn't work, you feel like you're burning money. So what makes a partnership really successful, that's the collaboration between us as a media company and the operator, where we constantly dig deeper into campaign reports and try to understand why things are working or not working. And from there we try to optimize.
And it's a data point. So how do you actually use the data, and would you leverage it, be it from media impressions perspective, also from betting behavior, then it could be from the operators, to understand what are those drivers of the success and also to match the right product with the right user?
Yeah, that's a good question because it has several layers. First, we have the insights on the demographics of the people consuming our content. So age, gender, device, such kind of things. And of course, what are the search terms they use to get into our content? And second, we do a lot of market research ourselves. So we also have a lot of zero-party data where people actually say, these are our interests and this is how we like to consume content. These are the channels we use. These are the brands we know. This is the offers we like. This is how we like to pay. All those kinds of things. We simply ask them to our audience and we use that feedback to better tailor our content production, both in articles and videos. So we ensure that the traffic remains stable and people come back to our sites. And secondly, we use that data, you use all those insights to connect it to the input we get from the operators. And that can be their brand positioning, their core values, and of course, their betting behavior, what they see at their customers. So, for example, we work with a large German operator. They gave us some insights on which target group, which people are the most interesting for them, are the best customers, and in what football leagues they're interested in. We use that input and then we tailor our content for that specific user group. So it better fits the audience. And on the other hand, it also generates more value for the operator. And that's in this case, that was a YouTube prediction show, specifically in Germany, but about the Turkish Superliga, because that was one of the most valuable things to promote. So we talk about the Turkish Super League because that's what the audience likes and also what generates value for the operator.
Yeah, and this is one of the ways that you are tailoring for a specific group of audience. And at the same time, whenever you're launching your campaigns, you need to take that into account. What are the preferences locally on a specific market or a sub-segment of a market? And how do you actually adapt your approach for these tailored markets? So what role does it play at the end of the day? And also you need to scale the strategy, and the strategy, the more you adapt it, the less scalable it becomes. Unless you tell me it's the other way around. So I'm curious to know what's your perspective.
No, well, I think local preferences, they play a very important role within the content production, especially in Europe, where you have so many different cultures, languages, and preferences. Because, I'm sure you recognize that in the southern of Poland, you have a different culture than in North Poland, what's next to the sea. The same goes in Germany. They speak a different language in southern Germany than in northern Germany. And where I come from in the Netherlands, it's also the same between East and West. So what you see is that even within a country, there are very specific needs for very specific regions and also specific interests of people. Most people from the Netherlands, they're not that interested in the Belgium league. They're interested in the German league and in the Premier League, but Belgium, no, that's not that relevant. So interests differ, language different, culture differs. And that is all you need to take into account when you go to market in a specific geo. And this goes from content production to land-based versus offline to preferred method of payment. All these kinds of things, they matter. So one size fits all, that doesn't work. Content needs to be tailored and also product needs to be tailored in each market and also to specific target groups. That's why in Germany, we have not one website. We have dozens of websites, but we have 2 or 3 who are the major ones. One is more specific tailored towards a more older audience, and one is more specific tailored to a younger audience where you have a tone of voice that is connected to a younger audience. So that's what comes into play when you try to localize and scale. Because ultimately, I think what's important to understand is that people who don't feel connected to the content you're producing, they see right through it, and then they don't trust you. And customer trust, that's a very important thing. When they trust you and they understand you, they feel, okay, this is a good company for me, then they start spending money at you.
Yeah, and especially in the context that you mentioned, you actually need to run multiple brands in order to fit into the expectations of the
Yeah.
specific group of people. And I remember earlier today you have mentioned one thing that stuck with me is about that trustworthiness. And now thinking about that, I'll just give you an example. Maybe it is a slightly different field. But even in IT companies, I've seen many companies that suddenly from one day to another, they started publishing hundreds of articles. But when going over there, you could easily tell that, hey, these articles were generated based on ChatGPT and they were like churned in the hundreds. They did produce a huge flow of information. And at the end of the day, for let's say the generic person, that could provide the first point of information at a very basic level. But if you want to go deeper, there's nowhere to go. It's very, very shallow. And these guys, they said that it did bring them some traffic. It didn't bring them interesting opportunities. But I struggle to believe that in the long term, this can be a successful strategy because people, even myself, I'm not a genius. I can go and I can easily see that it's not a human that wrote it. And then people start disconnecting in their minds from what they read because they don't trust it. And how do you see? Because on one hand, you want to reach people. So you want to have scale. You want to have as much content as possible, let's say. And on the other hand, you want to maintain that credibility in terms of what gets published, while in the meantime, you want to have as many NDCs as possible. But one goes more in the short term, one goes in the mid or long term, how to actually combine all those needs together.
Yeah, that's especially these days with the rise of AI and generative AI. That's a very interesting topic. And of course, we also use AI to not purely to produce articles, but to produce input, I would say, because exactly like you say, there's a very fine balance between what's genuine and what's not genuine. And AI isn't that sophisticated yet. Maybe it will come, but at the moment it isn't, to really create content that people feel like is being written by a human. And that balance is very important, to have a clear balance between, okay, how do we use it? And do we use it solely to generate traffic, or do we use it to inform people? And I think that, yeah, as mentioned before, trust here is very important, because people, they look right through you when you're just publishing bullshit for the sake of publishing. And we always try to keep a clear separation between, for example, commercial and sponsored content and more neutral content, simply by making people also aware that some content is sponsored and some content isn't sponsored. So that's why we also include multiple operators in those types of content, because in the end, like I said, people are not stupid and they need to feel you want to be taken serious. And if you have the feeling you're not being taken serious, then you opt out straight away. And that's not good for us. That's not good for the operators. So that is the important thing when it comes to balance. Of course, you want to scale and you want to produce more articles, but you don't want to produce more articles where people in the end walk away from your website because they don't trust you anymore. So that's what I meant with balance. And at the same time, producing content, because you also alluded to commercial goals in how you create content. I think people accept a certain amount of sponsored content when it feels natural, when it feels relevant. And also here, to give you an example, we work with an operator who sponsors in skiing. And for us, that is the type of operator we want to work with when we produce content about skiing, because there's a natural fit and it makes sense, because people see the operator on TV, they search for betting tips on skiing, they land on our page, and then they see the same sponsor advertising over there. So it feels natural and it feels logical. And it makes sense. And in the end, I think that's what builds trust, and trust builds returning customers, returning traffic, and in the end also NDCs at the operator.
I also have one more question referring to the metrics, because I remember that you have mentioned that key focus is on the NDCs and on the returning players as well. But correct me if I'm wrong, from my understanding, you're able to influence the path between building the interest for the potential player, bringing them to the operator side. But how much can you influence the fact that such a player returns more and more and more and more, even if this is not related to the fact that it was, let's say, high profile from the beginning? How much can you actually leverage your techniques and your media exposure to make them return?
Well, what we can influence is the way we produce content. And of course, from an affiliation point of view, you send players to the operators. But still, people search for betting tips. And although a player can be a customer at an operator, they still search for betting tips. And that's when they land at our page, because we're seen as neutral and we're comparing specific odds for specific matches. And so we're a trustful source of information. And from there, they again go to an operator. And we also measure that traffic towards operators. So, and here again comes into play that we need to be more or less neutral, and we need to compare multiple operators. We cannot only do it with one single operator. Of course, one operator gets more highlighted than the other because of the commercials, but still we need to compare. And the odds at several operators, they are different. And that's where we come into play. For also people who already are customers, that we have the role of helping them, and we give a clear overview so they don't have to go to 3 or 4 operators themselves to see what the best odds are. And this is about how you see your own position within the whole landscape. Do you see it purely as someone who leads new customers towards operators, or you see a role as being a help and being there for your audience and how you can help your audience? And that's also over here, it comes to balancing those two worlds.
Yeah, makes sense to me. And also one thing that came to my mind about personalization, because you mentioned running those multiple brands, but we know that if you remember the Cambridge Analytica topic during the first election of Trump and the way that the personalization can be pushed to its limits, myself working in the data, I know that whatever data you're able to gather, you're able to leverage it later for your benefit within the, let's say, legal framework that applies to a specific context. And
yes,
from your perspective, how does it work? How far can you go into the personalization without being intrusive, knowing that on one side you can run 1 to 12 different brands, but if you take Netflix, for example, they will go with 150 different segments or maybe 800 when they go very, very micro-targeted. And if we had this Cambridge Analytica case, they were doing it literally over, it's called leaves, so 5-6 group of people, or maybe even at a singular level. And this was publicly debated as intrusive. And what's your take on that? How to actually play the right balancing here?
I think personalization in a certain way is good. Look, I'm male, so I'm not really interested in advertisements for a sporting bra, for example. So for me, that kind of personalization is sending me relevant advertisements. That's good. I think there's a tipping point when it becomes unclear why you're getting specific messages. And if those specific messages try to steer you in one certain direction. So for relevance, I think it's good, but indeed it can be too intrusive when you have the feeling like you're being spied and you're being used. And also here, I think trust is a very important thing. Because, you know, I remember when I worked at the football club at FC Twente, we got relegated and we needed to sell season tickets. And the whole vibe around the club was very negative, and we had to turn that around. And one of the ways we did that is creating a very segmented campaign towards all the current season ticket holders. For example, we talked to someone who only had a season ticket for 2 years or 1 year. We said, well, okay, you cannot leave the club at this point. You cannot only be there in good times, you also need to be there in bad times. And to people who had a season ticket for like 15 years, we talked to them in another way. And we said, well, okay, you're with us for 15 years. Is this the point where you're going to leave us? So it are the slight differences in how you use personalization to communicate, in fact, the same message. In this case, please renew your season ticket. But you use the personalization in a slightly different way so people feel connected to the message and they understand your message. And then I think it works. And it did exactly that with the season ticket campaign, because we sold more season tickets than ever before. And we had open rates of email campaigns of like 89% and click-through rates of like above 50%. And the only reason we could think of, and we also asked people this afterwards, is because they felt like they're being taken serious by the club. And because we did all the effort to segment all these people and say, okay, you're different from the other person. And that's why we talk different to you than to another person, because you have different needs. And that's when people accept personalization. But when you feel like it's being used to push you in a side where you don't want to be pushed in, I think that's the tipping point. So don't personalize with stuff you're not supposed to know, I think is my advice, my take on it.
Yeah, maybe that's the good way to take it. And a final one from my side to wrap it all up. What do you think is the biggest untapped opportunity when working in a collaboration between the media and the betting platforms?
Okay. Well, I think the biggest untapped opportunity is collaboration and having a more holistic view on partnerships towards the whole marketing funnel, from media exposure to the player acquisition and the retention in the end. Too many times I talk to an affiliate manager who only looks at CPAs or NDCs. And in another team, there's someone buying the media and creating content. And in another team, someone's managing the sponsorships and activates those sponsorships. And they don't really know from each other what they are doing and why they are doing this. Because the work of person A influences the work of person B, influences the work of person C. And they're all driven by their own KPIs. And most of the times, not overseeing the whole picture. And luckily, we see that this is changing. One of the operators we work with at Better Collective started working with us purely on affiliation. Then they added a bit of media. They saw that this more holistic approach was working. In the end, we created more touch points among our audience, and we were sending them more NDCs and recurring customers. And now they're even expanding the partnership with us, and we're creating even more touch points. Because of this holistic approach, with a 360 campaign across multiple assets and multiple channels and multiple touch points, we see that the overall result, it grows. And at the same time, also on our side, at Better Collective, we also work still too much in different silos with separate teams for affiliation, media, and paid media, which is logical from a historical point of view. But I think towards future, the opportunity lies in breaking down the walls between those silos. And that goes internally at Better Collective, and also I think at operators, but also in the collaboration between us as media, affiliation, and operators. So if we collaborate more, have a better understanding of what we are doing and why we are doing it, and look at it from a holistic point of view, I think we can grow results across the board.
That's funny that you mentioned that if you take a look at, if we zoom out, let's say, and we look at all the technological advancements when we had the phone fixed lines, and we had this like phone that you had to turn the wheel in order to dial someone. Now we have iPhones and Androids, but at the end of the day, no matter what's the technological advancement, we go back to square one, and we need to break the silos, bring people together, and have more work towards one direction. And this is what you mentioned, at least from what I get.
Yeah, exactly.
Wow, perfect. That's a very nice wrap up for today. Thanks a lot, Tom. So, guys, today we covered topics like data, media, and sales are powering the iGaming growth. Thanks a lot, Tom, for joining me in this episode.
Thank you as well for having me. I enjoyed it, and looking forward to other episodes because I now started listening.
Perfect. So thanks again, and that should be it for today for us. So we'll be signing off, and remember, keep rolling with the data.